Test. طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا والحقنا بعبادك الصالحين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Welcome back to the resumption of the Khulafaa al-Rashidin series. This is now going to be on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Hopefully this is a time that is agreeable to most people. If not, we can, inshallah, refactor things around. But today is a very eventful episode, because what we're talking about here is Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu's conquests in Iraq. This is when the Muslimin would do a blitz of several Persian cities. And this would represent, after the Hurub al-Ridda, the first, or the, the first large-scale foreign expedition. Last time when we convened, we spoke about Dhat al-Salasil. And this was one of the first battles. The Persians, of course, these are a well-fought people. They are a people who have been fighting for a long time. And they've always dealt with the Arabs through their intermediaries. So the way that geopolitics worked in Arabia back then is that you had the Arab nomads, and then you had these big empires, the Persians and the Romans. And between the Arabian Peninsula and the Persians and the Romans, you had these buffer tribes. These were tribes Oftentimes they were Christian tribes who were allied either with the Persians or the Romans. They had treaties with them, and their job was really to like protect Persian trade, Persian cities from Arab raids. And for the first time, the Arabs had organized themselves, the Arabs had united, and now the Arabs were set on taking down these empires, and these were the Muslimin, of course. So in that is Salasid, which we already spoke about, so I'm not going to go into too much details. It's called the Battle of the Chains, and it's because the Persians actually chained up their forces, just as a kind of show of strength. Like, we're not going to retreat, and we are so sure we can beat you. And it ended up being a massacre of the Persian forces because they lost and they could not retreat. And this would be a theme through like about a dozen battles here in Persia, that the Persian armies are extremely arrogant. The Persian armies don't respect their Muslim enemies, because they think this is just a bunch of nomads. They're used to dealing with them. They don't understand that the Muslimin are now this new civilization. They don't understand that there's unity, organization, ambition. You know, we're like in one of the battles that we're going to talk about, Ayn al-Tamr, there's this one point where the Persians are in a fortress and they're not worried, because even though the Arabs besieging them, you know, are outnumbering them at this point, they think, well, you know, these are Arabs, they're desert nomads, they're just going to come and raid and retreat, because this was the practice of the Arabs. But of course, that was not Khalid ibn al-Walid's plan. Okay, so there were. Let me list off some of the names of the battles, and I have a picture that shows something. Maybe I can kind of flip my laptop around. I don't know if the camera will catch it. I don't know if you guys will catch it, but we shall try anyway. So this yellow region is Persia, Iraq in specific. You know, Persian Empire had Iraq, and this was the route that Khalid took, capturing city after city after city, fortress after fortress, cutting through from, you can say, like here, the southeast to the northwest of the Iraqi, what's like the present day, like Iraqi-Saudi border, essentially, all the way up to Sham. And it gets to this last battle here, which the Battle of Furad, which is a very important battle in Islamic history, because this was when the Persians and the Romans, they're like, we have to team up to defeat these Muslims. And we're going to talk about what happens when that happens. So we can't talk about all the battles just because there's so many of them. So I just picked some of the battles to speak about. One of them is the Battle of Walja. Again, there was a very limited response from the Persian armies. The local governor in the region did not feel the need to meet the Muslims out in full force. When Khalid engaged them in battle, he employed a trick that we're familiar with. He actually hid some of his troops behind the ridges and used them to attack the enemy rear at a critical moment, right? We know that Khalid ibn al-Walid employed that trick against the Muslimin once upon a time at Uhud. So, you know, now he's using that skill set, his old tricks now on the kuffar. And the Persian plan was to unite two armies to overwhelm the Muslims, but Khalid rushed ahead and to defeat one before the other could join. And of course, you know, if you're outnumbered, and when you look at the numbers in some of these battles, you notice the Muslimin are often an order of magnitude or more weaker in terms of just numbers. So when you do have small numbers, you have to get very creative. You cannot just go man to man, toe to toe, fighting 100 versus 1,000. It doesn't work. If you're going to make up the numbers difference, you have to kind of think on your feet. And one of the ways that Khalid did that in this battle was that he isolated one of the armies so that he did not have to fight a united force. So again, this battle was maybe the third defeat now here in Persia, and it really demoralized The Persians. Another battle was the Battle of Ulais. This was now, you had Christians and Persians fighting together. Christians of the Arab tribes and the Persians also, allied with them. And the commander of the Persians, who was this very famous general, very famous fighter, he orders his army to attack the Muslimin because he sees that he has the advantage. We have a bigger army, we're ready to destroy them. But his army kind of neglects him. They're like, you know what? These people can wait. We're going to destroy them. Let's throw a feast. So you have this situation where the army is insubordinate. They just want to party. And the Persian general is like, go fight the Muslims. And they're just like, not now. So they start feasting. But Khalid notices, hey, this is my opportunity. So he attacks them just randomly at night, out of the blue, and it becomes mayhem. And he makes a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, grant me victory, and I promise I will turn this river, because it was fought by a river, into a river of blood. So he's I'm going to butcher them, I'm going to kill this army. And so he fights them, and Khalid mentions that at the Battle of Mut'ah, he broke 9 swords in his hand. This is the battle that he fought with the Romans during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But he says, but I have never met an enemy like the Persians. And among the Persians, I have never met an enemy like the army of Ulais. So he's essentially saying, of course, despite this whole insubordination and their feasting, these were tough troops. It was not an easy fight for the Muslimin, but the Muslimin prevailed. And once he prevailed, he remembered that oath he made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's asking his companions, what am I going to do about this oath? Like, it's not like the river just turned into blood. So they said, the corpses of your enemies are still fresh. The blood has not dried yet. So there's a dam up ahead in the river. Open the dam, and the dam's going to come in, and it's going to kind of wash over the bodies. And so that's what they did. The water rushed over the bodies, and all the blood turned the river red. So he fulfilled his promise. This is how the Sahaba thought, and this is their bravery in battle. Like these are men who wanted to spill enemy blood and spill their blood, their own blood, for the sake of Allah, because this is the biggest sacrifice. The next battle was at a very strategic city, which would become the Muslim headquarters after the Muslimin won, called Al-Hira. Okay, the satrap in Persian politics, the satrap is like the regional, provincial lead. So he wanted to, hinder the Muslims by blocking the Euphrates River. So he sent his son with a contingent of soldiers on a mission to block the river. And why does he want to block the river? He wants to block Muslim sea vessels from crossing. He wants to block their logistics, and this, if he succeeded in doing this, it would really work to halt the Muslim advance. And because they would not be able to ford the river, they would not be able to get their logistics, their supplies across. So Khalid, he doesn't panic, he doesn't, start, getting mad. No. He realizes the only thing that gets you out of such a situation, you got to go and deal with it. So he takes his riders, his horsemen, and he just flies off for the Euphrates, and he tracks down the satrap's son with his army. And he's just as the satrap's son is about to finish his mission, intercepted, and he destroys the enemy army. He kills the enemy army along with the satrap's son, which terrorizes the satrap, because when the satrap, he gets 2 pieces of bad news at once. 1, the mission failed to block the Euphrates, and 2, his son's dead. And this is not a brave man. This is a man who, when he heard this news, he became terrified and ran away from the city. So he took his little entourage, he left, and he left the city of Al-Hira to fend for itself. So Khalid gets to the city and he starts to besiege the fortresses, and he tells the enemies in the fortresses, you must surrender, pay the jizya, or accept Islam. Right? This was the options that were offered to the kuffar. So at first, the enemy fortresses refuse, and they start pelting the Muslims with stones. The Muslims return their stones with arrows. Very soon after, it becomes clear to the fortress chieftains that, we're not going to be able to hold out. So they come out and they say, okay, we'll take the jizya option. We'll take the jizya option. 190,000 dirhams per year of jizya. And what's interesting that I want to point out is that Khalid ibn al-Walid, he actually gets mad at them for taking the jizya option. We know that Islam gives both options. You can, the kuffar don't have to convert to Islam. They can pay the tax instead and be protected. But Khalid says, may you be destroyed for having chosen to give us the tax. And it shows that Khalid and the Muslimin in general, they cared and they were interested not just in conquest. They were interested in really bringing people into the fold of Islam. They could not force anybody into the fold of Islam, but they would hope that the enemy would choose Islam rather than just paying the jizya. So, he doesn't say, okay, you guys don't have the option, but he does scold them. He does yell at them, like, you guys are idiots, you're losing your akhirah, and so on and so forth. And so the city becomes, like I said, a base of operation for the Muslimin, and Khalid continues. Khalid continues his march forward. And then a very famous battle, after Al-Anbar, which I'm not going to speak too much about, is Ayn al-Tamr. Ayn al-Tamr, this is a situation you have where there are 3 Arab tribes united under a man called Uqqa ibn Abi. This is an Arab Christian, and at the same time as you having these 3 Arab tribes with their army, you also have an army of Persians led by a general called Mihran. Okay, so you again see that the enemies of the Muslims, much to their misfortune, they underestimate the Muslims again. Uqqa ibn Abi, he tells the Persians, you know what, guys, we're going to take care of this ourselves. Don't come and help us. It takes Arabs to fight Arabs. So let us Arabs fight the enemy, and we don't need you. So Mihran, he says, okay, go. And so, but then the Persian soldiers, they begin to get mad at the Persian general. They're like, bro, we're not going to win, we're not going to help, we're not going to get the spoils of war. And so Mihran says, you know what, if they win against them, it's good for us. And we didn't have to lose any men. And if they lose, then we'll have a weakened enemy to fight, and we'll sweep up all the glory. So this gets you into the mindset of these 2 people. They're not being strategic, they're being egotistical, right? Which is going to bite them. And again, the numbers here are insane. It's 500 to 800 Muslims. Just 500 to 800. Just, you can imagine if we had this masjid really full, packed, that might be 500 if people were just packed like sardines. You had 20 to 30,000 combined enemy forces versus 500 to 800 Muslimin. Again, this requires extreme creativity and risk. You cannot just take 500, line up, toe-to-toe, shoulder-to-shoulder, fight the enemy conventionally and expect to win. So, Khalid ibn al-Walid does a very risky maneuver. See, he meets the army of Uqqa ibn Abi, and Uqqa ibn Abi is still organizing his soldiers. He's still doing his preparations. This is the pre-battle, lining up your men, making sure, everybody knows what their roles are. And the distance between the 2 armies is not that long. So this is a part in the book, because we're going through Ali Salabi's book, he actually gives a long-winded baseball analogy. I was surprised to find that. So I'm going to explain to you guys the baseball analogy of what Khalid does. Are you guys familiar with the rules of baseball? Yeah. Do you know what stealing a base is? You know that? You know? Do you know? What means? So you know what stealing a base is? I actually had to research this when I was reading the book because I'm like, I didn't understand this. You know what it is though. So stealing a base is like, so you guys know to score a point in baseball, you go to first base, second base, third base, and then you go to back to home plate and you get a point. And usually it's like when somebody hits the ball, it's like the ball's in the air. While the ball's in the air, you have to run from one base to another. But you can steal a base because once the pitcher gets the ball and he's going to throw it to the catcher, that ball is in the air, you can run. Right? Because whenever the ball's in the air, you can run. So you can run and try to steal a base before even the game has started, sort of thing. All right? So people in baseball, they're always worried about people on first base and second base because people on first base and second base, they can run and steal a base. But they're not worried about the people on third base because third base, if third base wants to steal home plate and score a point, that's right where the catcher is. That's right where the pitcher is throwing the ball. So if you throw the ball at the catcher and the catcher has the ball and then you're coming to home plate, he can just tag you out. Okay, this is a long-winded explanation of baseball. But the author explained it, and I figured it was fun enough to connect to what Umar does. Because even though stealing home plate is like almost unheard of, that also means that the enemy doesn't expect it. And sometimes in baseball history, someone has stolen home plate successfully. It requires the right timing and the right understanding of your enemy's awareness and expectations. It's a high risk, high reward strategy. But again, when the numbers are like this, high risk, high reward strategies are necessary. So what he does, what Khalid does, is he takes a small contingent of his cavalry, he runs up to the enemy while they're preparing, while Uqqa ibn Abi is walking around and, you hold your spear like this and, you guys all stand like this. He runs up to them, he grabs Uqqa ibn Abi and he carries him off like a baby back to the Muslim forces. He kidnapped their commander. And it's risky because easily the opposite could have happened. Easily the enemy could have, tagged him out, caught Khalid instead, and kidnapped Khalid instead. So anyway, they take back Uqqa bin Abi, and the enemy now doesn't have their commander. The enemy is demoralized. The enemy surrenders. Notice they won without even fighting the battle. So what happens next? Remember, the Persians are still in their fortress. Many of the Persians escape. I've seen conflicting sources on this. Some of them say that the Persians ran away and the villagers came in and kind of sought refuge in the fortress. Some of them said that the Persians stayed in the fortress. In either case, the Muslimin come up to the fortress with all of the Christian prisoners and they say, okay, open up your gates or else we're going to kill the prisoners. Okay? And the prisoners have not yet been taken off the battlefield. So it is still the prerogative of the Muslim commander, does he want to take prisoners or not? It's not required for him to take prisoners. So he uses the prisoners as a threat, like open up, surrender, or we kill the prisoners. So they say no. So Khalid executes all the prisoners, including Uqqa bin Abi. And then they start to siege the fortress. And, over time, the fortress can't really hold out against the Muslimin, and they surrender. And one of the interesting things about this battle is that there was a monastery with a group of 40 Arab Christian choir boys studying Bible. So Khalid captures this monastery, and he assigns these Christian boys protection in Medina. So because they're still children, but in Islam, when you conquer such a place like this, the children and the women and children become slaves, but slaves from an Islamic law perspective, not from Western chattel slavery. So in essence, these people will become integrated into Muslim society through families that adopt them. And what's interesting, the reason why I mentioned that it's interesting, is that many of these Arab Christian choir boys become the ancestors of important figures of Islamic history. So one of them, his name was Sirin. You might know Muhammad bin Sirin, the famous scholar in Islam. Muhammad bin Sirin's dad was one of these choir boys, who was given. This is the slave that was given to Anas bin Malik. One of them was called Nusayr, and his son was Musa bin Nusayr. Musa bin Nusayr, the commander one of the commanders with Tariq bin Ziyad, who took over Al-Andalus, right? So this Christian choir boy, his converts to Islam, becomes integrated into Islamic society. His son becomes the one who conquers Christian Spain. And there's also Yasir, who is the grandfather of Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq, the very famous historian, the one who writes the famous seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Abbasid period. So one of the lessons about all of these battles is that Khalid, in order to win, had to employ ingenuity, creativity in his tactics, and speed. He had to be really, really fast. Actually, the author mentions in one of the lines of the book, he says that the victories themselves were not. It wasn't the victories themselves that were impressive. It was the speed at which the victories were collected. Battle after battle, even within the battles, how Khalid ibn Walid would rush and try to decapitate the enemy as quickly as possible. And actually, I would go a little bit further than the author. It's not just a matter of okay, the speed was the impressive part. The speed was the necessary part. Without the speed, the victories would not have happened. It's simply can you get inside your opponent's decision loop? Can you make decisions faster than them? Can you get to a point where you take them by surprise? The great thing about the element of surprise when you attack and your enemy doesn't know what you're doing is that you know what you're doing. Your enemy is forced into reaction mode. So this is important when you study any strategic manual, whether it's a war manual or a business manual. What you learn is that you want to take offensive all the time. And taking the offensive is really about outpacing your opponent. That way your opponent is forced into a frame in which they're reacting. And that was the frame, even though the Persian Empire was just so huge, it had such big armies and so much wealth and so much experience, Khalid was able to outpace them and force them into a reactive mode. And the reactive mode is one that is just super vulnerable. That way Khalid was able to kind of build up enough momentum against the enemy, even though he's a much smaller opponent, kept the big Persian Empire on its heels, which really tells you something about how you succeed at anything, not just war. Which takes us to the Battle of Furat. The Battle of Furat was, like I said, the Persian and Roman alliance against the Muslimin. Furat is right on the border of Sham. So the Romans were not happy that the Muslimin were coming uncomfortably close now to the Romans. Even though you have to remember that the Romans and the Persians, they've been at war with each other for centuries. Maybe millennia at this point, if you go back all the way to Alexander the Great and the Greeks and the Romans. So this is a very old conflict. But you notice that when there is an enemy that unites the two, the conflict which has been raging between the Persians and the Romans for so long takes a back seat. Here's this emerging Muslim Khilafah. We need to be able to kind of crush it before it gets too much out of hand. So the Persians and the Romans and a bunch of Arab tribes unite themselves against the Muslimin. And there's this bridge that both sides are each on the opposite of. So the enemy tells the Muslimin, either you cross over to us or we will cross over to you. So Khalid tells them, okay, then you cross over. So the enemy says, then move to one side and allow us to cross. Khalid said, we will not do that. So instead cross over from below where we were positioned. Again, the enemy is walking right into a trap. Like the Muslimin are in an advantageous geographical position, but they feel like this is it. Like these are just a bunch of nomads. They attack, and the Muslimin, even though they take heavy losses and the battle was very contentious, they absolutely wreck the Christian and the Persian and the Roman forces, which dealt a huge psychological blow to the Persians. Like, it would take a while before Persia was really fully eliminated, but understand that as an empire, they could not recover psychologically speaking, as their dignity was gone. What Khalid was able to do, crossing all across Iraq, was one of maybe like the greatest feats in the history of conquests. Because again, you have to look at the numbers he had. Very small numbers compared to the numbers that the enemies had. And you have to look at the technology and the materials and the weapons. Even though like the gaps in technology aren't as big as they are today, still you had different types of armor that the enemy had. You had different types of steel that the enemy had, or metals that the enemy had, and so on. So it shows you how much you can accomplish with unity and resolve, and really all of that stuff that which comes from Iman, right? Now after this, Khalid ibn al-Walid, being ordered back to Medina, his next chapter would be having to invade Sham, Syria. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. But this is when famously Khalid decided he wanted to make a detour to Mecca to do Umrah, or to do Hajj, sorry. So Khalid wanted to do Hajj. So he detaches from his army with a little entourage, and he takes like a route which is not known. Usually like these roads in Arabia are known. Like, like usually if you want to go from one city to another, there's a specific way to go. So he takes a way which is unconventional, so that he wouldn't be spotted. Okay? He's doing this without permission. This is why all the cloak and dagger. Khalid ibn al-Walid wants to do Hajj, but he didn't get the permission of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh to leave the army. But he leaves the army anyway, and he goes and he does the Hajj, and he rejoins his army just in time. So he was able to kind of go super fast that the time he lost doing Hajj, he was able to make up for with his speed and rejoin his army. But his cover was blown because he was spotted in Mecca doing the Hajj. So Abu Bakr learned about that, and he was angry. So he sent a letter to Khalid, whose main points can be summarized as follows. He ordered him to leave. Let me just see what's the letter saying here. So yes, because he ordered him to go to Sham, and he rejoined his army just in time to sync up while making the Hajj. Abu Bakr reproached Khalid for leaving his army without permission, warned him to never make the same mistake. He encouraged Khalid to work hard and to do his utmost, not for worldly gain, but purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warned Khalid radiallahu anhu not to become proud or boastful as a result of his achievements. Similarly, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu warned him against thinking that by fighting disbelievers, he was doing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a favor. Rather, all favors are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is He alone who guides people to become obedient to Him. So he took it as an opportunity to coach Khalid a little bit. And that's much needed, right? Anybody, when they have victory or success, there's the risk that they start to develop bad habits, bad mindsets. They start to misattribute that success to themselves, start to have an ego about it. So anybody, in any position who wants to help the deen for the sake of Allah, They need a mentor. They need somebody who's going to be able to kind of call them out when they start to see like, you're becoming a little bit arrogant, or you're starting to have an ego, or whatever it is. And not even to just do that when a person starts to have an ego, but to preempt it. Right? It's not like Khalid had an ego. Definitely not. But Abu Bakr just wanted to keep things very strong in him so that it never got to that level. And so that takes us to the end of the content for today. Next week, inshallah, we will start to talk about the strategy and the conquests in Iraq. But any questions from anything from today? We can spend the next 5 minutes for any questions that there are. No? Take your time if you have any thoughts. Yeah, good question. I mean, today, if you want to look at what are the geopolitical corollaries, I mean, you have what are the two empires, right? Well, clearly Rome is the United States. That's the West. And you also have China as an emerging world power. You also have Russia, which is not quite there but it's also a power. So, the Muslimin, we persist as a kind of, just as we were disunited before the Prophet ﷺ's da'wah succeeded, we are disunited now. And just as we were caught between two empires which were in a fight, right now we're caught between two empires which are also not quite yet fighting, but competing. And US and China might eventually come into full conflict with each other. And the Muslimin might be caught in between, and you might have some Muslim countries helping China and some Muslim countries helping the United States, just as you had some Arab tribes helping Rome and some Arab tribes helping Persia. So, I mean, the lesson here is clear, which is that when the Arabs are united under Islam, their ingenuity, their resolve, their perseverance can make up the difference, that development gap that exists between maybe the material or technological strength of the West, the material or technological strength of China. At the end of the day, the enemy underestimated Khalid ibn al-Walid extremely. And the enemy was weakened by centuries of fighting each other, Persians and Romans fighting each other. So by the time the Muslimin rose up, it was ripe for conquest, Persia and Rome. So we have to do our best as an ummah. We have to do the work to get the Muslimin to unite. And they can only unite on the basis of Islam as a system. Unfortunately today, even though we have 2 billion Muslimin, these 2 billion Muslimins do not take their Islam to be a system. They do not understand that Islam is the basis for organizing ourselves into one polity, one political union, one mission, one project, and work together hand in hand for that. No, we are divided by secular nationalistic lines. And that's what's kept us weak for the past 100 or so years. So, if we can do that, and really that's our mission. If you're a Muslim today and you recognize what's happening in the Ummah, your mission is to wake the Ummah up, to unite on the basis of Islam. So that we can protect our interests. So that we can protect the Muslimin in Palestine. So that we can implement Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sharia. Right? And for people who are maybe joining us for the first time, the reason why we're doing this whole series is to understand that what we want to bring about today in terms of having a Khilafah is something that existed way back then. And it served Islam and it served us very well for more than 1,000 years, and especially in these years of the Khulafaa al-Rashidin. So it's the right question to ask. It's the right way to think. Barakallah feek. Any other questions? No? طيب, barakallah feekum, and we'll see you next week inshallah at the same time, Tuesday 8 p.m. I apologize for being late this week. And yeah, we'll speak about in Persia. Assalamu alaikum.